All right, tonight we're going to talk about water chemistry, but let's start with some announcements before we get into all of that. That way we can get the business side over, and then we can kind of go into a discussion time. So the biggest one is the cookout that's coming up June 12th. So June 12th, cookout at Little Creek, that's in South Charleston. Super excited for that. The club will be providing the main food, probably burgers and hot dogs, and you all can bring sides and obviously beer. Please do RSVP on the sign up. The sign up is in the Facebook event, but if anybody's not on Facebook, you don't need to be on Facebook to use the sign up. I'm going to drop it in the chat now. What's helpful about sign up, first of all, we can see what other people have signed up for. There's a list of things you can sign up for, but you can also RSVP, not just yourself, but any family that you might be bringing with you. So we're looking forward to that June 12th. Any questions about our cookout?
It's open to anybody. If you got any friends or whatever that are interested or want to come check it out, bring them along.
Yeah, this could be a great opportunity if you have friends who have been interested in joining the Homebrew Club but haven't yet, to just bring them out, let them try some stuff. Be a good opportunity. Okay. So that will be kind of our main event in June. And then we're not going to have a meeting in July. We'll maybe have like a brief check-in or something like that. And then in August, we're hoping to begin meeting in person again at Bridge Valley. So, woohoo! Pretty pumped for that.
All right.
So that's our summer schedule. Should be good. Austin, Chris, any announcements I'm missing?
Not that I can think of.
Yeah, I can't think of anything either.
Cool.
Is there anything
Great.
with the brewing program? Any updates with that? The mentor program?
Not that I know of. Oh, the mentoring program. We have not had anybody sign up to be mentored yet. So
okay.
Thank you for those who have signed up to be mentors. I think we probably just need to keep kind of marketing it and getting the word out there. Probably be good to do word of mouth. In fact, I could probably Facebook message a few people that I've talked to. So if any of you have people in mind for those who don't know what we're talking about, I think everyone does. But kind of Chris has put together this mentor program where we can essentially have people sign up to be mentored to learn how to brew beer in a year. Probably most of us, when we got into brewing, had somebody else who kind of mentored us. It was maybe a little less official than this is. But kind of our thought is that there's a lot of people out there who are interested in it, or maybe they've gotten a kit before, but they need help getting to the next level, or because it's a big process, right? And so we want to invite people into mentorship. So we have some of you have signed up to be mentors. If anyone else is interested in mentoring somebody, please let us know. But also if you know anybody who you think would be good to join our program, that is kind of at that place where they're interested in brewing but haven't jumped all the way in, feel free to send them a text or a phone call or whatever, invite them in.
I'll say on that note, just thinking about how we're going to take like a little bit of a time off, so to speak, between June and August. We probably need to think about reaching out to the Charleston Main Streets and make sure we get us a table for the Foam at the Dome and the October West, so we can have something set up for that. Because if we don't reach out until late August, it might be kind of a cluster trying to get that together. So we should probably think about making sure we get us a table, and then we can kind of start thinking about what we're going to do. If we're going to do anything more than just roll the banner out and say what's up to people, if we want to try to have some equipment out, or if they'll give us space and we could do a demo at one of them or something like that.
Yeah.
I haven't even looked. I know one of them's kind of in the afternoon. I think October West is usually later, so that's kind of a little tougher to do a demo if you kind of get stuck doing a bunch of crap later in the evening, and then you got to kind of wrap up and all that. But start thinking about that because it'll be here before you know it. So we can touch base with that, Jed and Chris, and get that kind of figured out, and then we'll wrangle up some people to help.
Yeah, I can reach out to Adam about it.
Yeah, especially as once August hits, we're going to start seeing a number of those festivals start to kick off again. August, September, October. So that's a good point. We want to be ready for those. Brilliant Stream tends to try to keep updated what festivals are happening in West Virginia. So I just put the link in the chat for anybody interested. That's good. All right. Well, let's talk water chemistry. Before we get started on the discussion, and I'll let you all know there's not a whole lot of a plan for this, so I'm hoping it'll be kind of organic. I was trying to gather a list of kind of questions that people were hoping would get addressed tonight. So some of the ones that people put in the Facebook event was, one was just about water, period, like what water to start with. RO water, or what kind of water filters do different people use? What are different people doing who are paying attention to their water chemistry? So that's a question. Another question was just about the pH basics and how to adjust and change and monitor for pH. Any other question? Richie asked specifically about the Brewfather app, if anybody has experience with it. We will talk about a couple of calculators that at least Chris and I use, and would definitely love to hear ones that others use. But anyway, what other questions or what other things about water chemistry do you all hope will get addressed in our conversation tonight?
How about when to add, if you're going to add brewing salts, when to add them? When's the best time? Before your mass, after your mass, on it.
Good. Any others? Richie, sorry, you're muted. It looks like you're talking, but I think you're muted right now.
There we go. If you're using an app and if you're questioning what they're telling you to add, I mean, how do you do that? I mean, if you think that they're adding you to add too much of this or too much of that, I mean, where do you make that adjustment? I mean, it has to do with experience, obviously, but
yeah, okay.
I think you have to take a lot of notes, and you have to, say, what did I do this time versus that time? Because I think the apps kind of mislead you a little bit from my experience.
Yeah. Good. Okay, that's helpful. So, Chris actually made a pretty basic handout, and I'm going to share that with you all here in just a second. Chris, are you there? Are you available? Do you want to intro it? Do you want to take the lead on this, or yeah?
I'm here. I'm not prepared, but I can help answer questions.
Okay, sounds good. So no worries. I got it. So what I'm going to do, this is just to give us a starting point. So some of you might already be like, hey, I already know all this. Great. No worries. So I'm going to share this doc. I think all of you should be able to at least comment on it, be able to open it and comment it. You probably can't change anything. You can look at that. So this is a breakdown, and like I said, this is like a layman's overview, okay? So it starts with the idea the first step in water chemistry is obviously figuring out your starting water. So if you're using tap water to get a report, you can get a free report from the city that's going to tell you some stuff. And then there's places like Ward Lab where you can send in samples of water and you can get exactly the water chemistry you need for your beer. So either doing that or starting with like RO water, reverse osmosis water that I know like Aaron Silver gets his from Walmart, I believe. And it's fairly cheap. That kind of starts you from zero and you can add up there. That's probably the easiest thing to do. So anyway, you want to start with your water and where you're at. And then most of us are using calculators. And here in a second, I'll just take you all through the one that I use and show you how I add it. And we'll go from there. Actually, I'm just going to do that now. Is that okay? Can I just take you all through the calculator I use? First of all, I should give the disclaimer that I'm not an expert on beer water chemistry.
Sure.
I do have a degree in chemistry, and I did a lot of water chemistry in college, but I have some practical knowledge. There's probably other people who know more than I do. So, but let me walk us through that. So I like using the Easy Water calculator. It's a spreadsheet, and it kind of shows you what steps to do it in. So this will be good. Can everybody see this screen okay? Let me turn the view up.
Yep.
Yeah.
I can see it.
Yes.
Oh, too much. Hold on. All right, we'll just leave it here. So let's say I'm somebody that's starting with RO water and I'm starting from zero. These are the things that really matter. It's your salts in the first place, or your cations and your anions in the water that are going to naturally be in water, and actually these things can often be helpful or not helpful depending on what you're doing. So let's say 100% of my water is RO water or distilled. You could do distilled water too. Let's say my mass volume is 3, my sparge water is 4. So first you enter your water chemistry. The second thing you do is you enter your grains, because grains, depending on what grains you're doing, they themselves will adjust pH. So let's say, I don't know, I got 8 pounds of 2-row, and let's put in a pound of Munich, and let's see, we'll do a pound of Vienna. All right, so whatever. You put in your grain, and already that is starting to affect your pH. So you can see on the right how it's affected it. Your basic 2-row is going to have like 5.7, but see, I did this Munich. Munich has 5.3, right? So that's dropping my overall pH. Step 3 is you look at your mass pH. So Eric asked the question, when do you adjust your water chemistry? You adjust it before your mass or during the mass. That's really the place that you want to add your salts and those things, is all during the mass. At least that's when I do it. If other people do it at different times, be interesting to hear. So usually what happens for most of us, just doing our base grains and just doing distilled or RO water, you're going to end up with a pH that's a little bit too high. So usually you're dropping it. One really easy way to drop your pH, and this is honestly what I often do to adjust my pH, is using acidulated malt. You can buy acidulated malt. Basically, acidulated malt is just 2-row that's kind of coated in lactobacillus, which lactobacillus is naturally on grains anyway, but acidulated malt will drop it. So look at how much it drops it. Right now with my grains, I'm 5.6. If I just add 1 ounce, it drops it by 0.6, right? So if you use 4 ounces, which is not that much, I mean, that brings you to the very low end of that spectrum, right? So a acidulated malt will drop your pH really quick. Like I said, I usually use a acidulated malt to adjust just my pH because it's grain, and I kind of like that about it. Okay, before we go on, any questions so far? Any questions on the process so far?
I was just going to add, like, if you start out with RO water, and if you add your salts before you even mix the mash, that'll have the most effect on dropping the pH. Because once that mash becomes in contact with that water, that reaction happens, within like a couple minutes, and that solution basically becomes a big buffer, and you can't really adjust it. It's hard to adjust it. You have to add like twice as much stuff to adjust it after you've mixed your mash. So I was just going to say, I've seen people like, mix their mash and say, oh, my pH is too high. Let me add some calcium chloride, or let me add some lactic acid. Well, by that point, it's easier just to do it up front before you mash in.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I know for me, usually what I do is I, get my barge water and I put it in my mash container, and I get it to whatever, let's say it's 3 gallons, and then I add my salts, and then I add my grains next. So that's a good point. Order of operations certainly matters.
I mean, so with this app, I mean, when you hit the next step, it'll make those adjustments, correct?
This here, yeah. So this, and it's just a spreadsheet, just a basic spreadsheet. It's telling you what to do. Now, the thing that it doesn't really do great, and I'll kind of come back to that, is talking about target, like your target profile. So right now I'm just talking about mash pH. Other ways to adjust your mash pH up or down, gypsum, probably a lot of people use gypsum. So you can add gypsum, calcium chloride, or Epsom salts. So all of those are going to bring your pH down. They're going to drop it, but obviously those are also adding other things, right? They're adding magnesium, calcium chloride, sulfates. So all of that comes into play too. Let's say I don't have any acidulated malt. I could add some calcium sulfate and some calcium chloride and some Epsom salt. Boom. If I just do 2 grams, just keep in mind, 2 grams, not a whole lot. Like 2 grams is a very small amount. Those things could drop me into my range. Let's say I want to be lower in that range. Oh, I use 3 grams of each. I'm getting there, right? This brings up a point that you've got to have a good food scale, or a jewelry scale, or a weed scale, or you got to have something that'll measure, ideally to tenths of a gram, or hundredths of a gram, at least to a tenth of a gram, to be able to do this, because a little bit really does go a long way in how you adjust it. If you need to bring it up, which I've like never had to bring mine up, probably the easiest thing to use is baking soda. You can also use slaked lime, which you can buy slaked lime from homebrew stores, or even chalk. So those will bring your pH up. Anybody here ever have to adjust their pH up in a brew? I'm curious.
Well, I mean, the test water that I get from the Beckley water system, plus I have 2 different tests. I have the Beckley water system and the water that runs through the filter that I have. I mean, it's the pH is about 7. So, I mean, I mean, I get some crazy readings on the app. That's what I was telling you. I was like, I mean, it gets, sometimes I question. I'm like, I mean, is 1 gram going to do anything in 30 gallons? I don't know. So, I mean,
That would be a good thing to question.
small amounts can, adjust the pH. I don't know.
Yeah, it can go a long way. And so the next thing that you've really got to think about is the water profile that you're going for. So this one has Palmer's recommended ranges. This is kind of a catch-all for like, oh, most beers you want it to be here. My recommendation is to look up what range you want on these different anions, depending on your beer that you're making. So if you're doing a Pilsner, it's going to be one thing. If you're doing a stout, it's going to be another. So looking those up, and usually when you adjust your pH, this is partly why I like calculators like this. You can adjust your pH in a way that will also get you to your target water profile at the same time. So that's where if you just use a acidulated malt, let's say this is the range I'm going for. I'm too low in all these areas, obviously, if I'm using RO water. But if you use these brewing salts, which by the way are all really cheap, they are not expensive. Those can also help you give the right water profile per style. Okay, that was really basic going through a calculator. All right, discussion, let's talk. What other questions come up, or anybody have a different process than what I just went through?
Well, I was just going to say, if you live in the Charleston area and you use the tap water, our water is like naturally pretty soft. It doesn't have like a lot of permanent hardness. So you can get away with just using brewing salts on most recipes, and that'll drop the pH. You really don't even have to use acid if you don't want. But it's definitely true that if you add that acid, that will neutralize that hardness. Because there's different types of hardness. There's permanent and then there's temporary. The temporary is what's removed when you add the salts, and the permanent you can only remove by like boiling it and then letting it settle, or using an acid. So, but I definitely agree with what you said, that the pH is important, but also the amount of salts you have, because that calcium is definitely beneficial during fermentation. The yeast need calcium, and tap water doesn't really have a whole lot. It has some, but not enough that you need for, recommended ranges. So it's always good to add some gypsum or calcium chloride if you have it, even if you're using just tap water. That's what I think.
So Eric, which program do you use?
I actually just use Beersmith. Beersmith put a water calculator in their new app, or their version. They did an upgrade a while ago, and they added water chemistry to it.
Yeah, I gotta figure out how to get that version 3.
Yeah, you had to pay for it, but
yeah, they act like in the email he act like I had access to it or something. I don't know,
but really, it's really like that calculator that Jed had. I mean, I think it's all the same stuff. I think it's just,
well, what I was gonna say is like I'm just interested in figuring out like what use RO water in Charleston are using for their baseline, like their filtered tap water baseline. I mean, I know you can look it up and stuff, but I was just wondering, like, to compare numbers, like what you all are using. Like,
I talked to my bad, I didn't mean to butt in. I talked to an engineer at American Water years ago, and you can get some basic seasonal profiles. but he said that our water is very dependent on it's hard. Like right now, the river's real low, so that water profile is going to be totally different than this weekend once we get a lot of rain and it washes down from the mountains.
Yeah.
If you're wanting to
Yeah, I mean,
actually build a water profile, you really need to start with like an RO or a distilled or somewhere.
yeah, I mean,
Because with tap water, you're just never going to hit your targets that you want to.
Yeah.
You have to have a test kit. I mean, that's the only way to get it.
Yeah.
If you're getting
Well,
water out of the tap, you have to have your own test kit.
I would say the tap water will change. You're right, but I would argue that it wouldn't change enough that would make a huge difference in your in your beer around here anyway. I mean, it's not going to go from like super soft to like super hard water. I don't think.
No, I use tap water in all my beers. I'm just saying if you're trying to build that profile and really nail it down like you want, if you're looking at your calcium content and your sodium content and at that type of levels trying to build a profile, you need to start with a clean slate.
Yeah.
Sorry, that's just what I was saying.
Yeah, I mean that if you start with a clean slate, I mean, yeah, you can't go wrong. Which are like you can get RO water pretty cheap, or you can buy a filter even if you want and set it up in your house. So
yeah. So I use tap water, but I use a Pelican water filter. So there's like a coal miner shower in my basement, and I brew just outside of my basement door. And so it's an ion exchange filter, basically like a Brita filter. And I run my water through that before I brew. I don't know exactly how much it drops everything, but ion exchange filters are actually pretty helpful in taking out all your positively and negatively charged stuff. Plus, they have a carbon filter in them. So I do that, and I basically treat it like RO water, even though it's probably still got some in it. That's like a very minimal way to do it.
That's kind of what I was getting at. It's like I know pretty much everybody's filtering their water one way or another, their tap water. So I was interested in seeing like what people use as their baseline. If it's not the test numbers that you get off of West Virginia American Water, because it's running through a filter. I got the old fashioned, canister filter like they sell on every homebrew website. And I mean, you could taste the difference in the water. So I mean, it's doing something. I mean, it tastes different than when it comes straight out of the faucet. So it's doing something. I don't have a test kit or anything. So it's like, I don't know exactly what it's doing. That's why I was just interested to see like what people used as their baseline in these calculators.
yeah, I actually have a little test kit. It's just one of those it's like a drip reagent thing. It's not like super expensive, but I've done it a couple times, and it pretty much matched with the published report online. I think Chris posted that report on the club Facebook page too, which is just like the average.
Was that after you ran through the filter?
No, just right out of the tap. And the results from that kit matched what was on the average report. So actually, the past several years, I just run tap water. I don't filter it or anything. I just add sodium metabosulfite, which is basically what's in a Camden tablet, and that'll get rid of the chloramine. If you just you have to measure it out though, because you don't want too much of that in there. Or you could just buy a Camden tablet and drop it in there. I don't know if anybody else uses Camden tablets, but I think they basically do the same thing with as far as charcoal, as far as removing the chloramine.
Yeah, I use Camden tablets, and I've always used Camden tablets. I would say if you are using tap water, you definitely need to get Camden, either get Camden tablets or measure it, because chloramine is not going to boil out of your water in a brew day.
Yeah, and I think like the threshold for off flavor is like super low. Like it doesn't take a whole lot to taste it in the finished beer, like as an off flavor. So you definitely want to do something.
Jed, you're saying use Camden even if you filter your water, or just if you're using it straight out of the tap?
If you're using it straight out of the tap, if not, I mean, if you're, I use Camden even with my filter, just because I'm like, I don't want chloramine in my water. And probably an ion exchange and the carbon filter does a good job removing chloramine, but not all of it. But I've always used chloramine. Now, obviously, if you have a house RO filter, or even under the sink RO filter, you're good. But I think reframing this discussion, maybe we could even say, like, what are the most basic water chemistry things that anybody should do? And then what's kind of the medium level stuff, and then the more advanced, right? So let's talk about that. What do you all, and let's hear from different people who are paying attention. What would you all say is some of the more, like, the most basic, kind of simple water chemistry stuff you could do to pay attention to brewing? I would say Camden tablet is one of those things.
Can I make a comment? If you're starting out and you're doing 5 gallons, you can get purified water from Walmart. And if you check their website, it's zeros across the board. So if you start from there and enter those numbers into your app, Beersmith, whatever you want to do, you're going to get good results. There's no chlorine. I mean, $5 for 5 gallons. I mean, why would you not do it versus buying a filtering system or any of that? I mean, to me, that's what makes sense.
I would say before I started to actually adjust the profile for brewing based on RO water, Camden tablets was something you always did. I'm glad I don't have to do that anymore using RO water. But I kind of bulked that into the, anything that's not grains and hops, like what do I add to beer? And it was like Camden tablets and some kind of clarifier. So, for me as like a beginner, those two things were kind of grouped together. And then when I started down the journey of adjusting the water profile, the question was very quickly, like, what does all this stuff I have to buy? Like, what's the toolkit I buy for adjusting
it's expensive.
chemistry of the water? And like, I just wish I had that answer, like just buy these 5 things and then you're good. And it turned into like, I have a whole tote now of like gelatin and like all the stuff you stick in there that's not beer related.
Mm-hmm. Same.
Yeah, I think if you're gonna do anything, the first basic thing is either filter or add a Camden to get rid of that chloramine, because I think that's the least minimum you want to do. But if you buy RO water, you don't have to worry about any of that.
I'm not sure that Chris and I both buy RO water from Walmart. They have like is it Primo water?
Yeah, it's Primo with the
Primo
machine.
water. It's like, if you've never seen it before, it's like after the checkout,
right beside the women's restroom.
Yeah, the women's restroom, like the place where they do the ladies' nails. Like it's on that wall. So it's kind of awkward to be there if you've never done that before.
They've got an inside hookup.
Pro tip: if you do go fill up, or if you go buy something there, the big question for me was like, do I buy this before I go up there and grab it and walk out, or do I grab it and then walk back around to the checkout? Apparently, you can use self checkout.
Yeah,
at Walmart with the fill-ups or the pre-filled, vessels of water. So if you're considering RO water, like that kind of lowers the barrier.
And it also only costs like $3 for 5 gallons and like $2.80 for 3 gallons. So
Yeah,
really affordable.
always fill up.
I think I think that is by far like the safest option is to do that, and it's fairly inexpensive. So I would agree with you all. I would agree with you, Richie. At the same time, guess what? I don't do that. You know why? Because I just don't live that close to Walmart. And sometimes I don't get to plan that far in advance and have water sitting around. Sometimes I'm like, oh, dang, tomorrow, like I'll have a few hours to brew. And so like I'm too lazy, or I didn't anticipate. And so that's partly why I use water here, because I like the convenience of having what's here at my house. And so for me, I use the ion exchange filter. I know it's not perfect, right? Like, but it definitely makes a huge difference. Like you said, you can taste the water and be like, wow, this tastes different. And I use Camden tablet. And I do add to the water. The next thing I do is pH. I actually think mash pH really matters too. And then after that, I think kind of hitting the water profile piece is probably more advanced. I thought that was an interesting question that Aaron asked, or like, what are the key things to own? Because there are a ton of things you could own. So I'm curious, what are the water chemistry ingredients that people in this call use or have that you regularly use, or you use in maybe almost every brew?
Calcium chloride. Gypsum, Epsom salt, and canning salt.
Pickling salt.
Mhm.
Yeah, what's the calcium?
Yeah, the only things I use are calcium chloride, gypsum, and sodium metabosulfite. Which is basically the same thing as a gypsum. I just bought a big thing of the SMB because it also scavenges like free oxygen.
Yeah. All those things are really cheap too. You could buy like a supply that would last you for years for like $10
Yeah.
for all that, probably.
You're talking about adding like grams, so you don't need to use very much at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I
at
think
Dover Zipper, I get a pound of Epsom salt, and I mean, that's all I need. But that'll last me a long.
Yeah, I'm actually on the same bag of Epsom salt for 2 years now.
Yeah.
And it only costs like $1.99.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My toolkit, I think I also have things like lactic acid, citric acid. Trying to think what else. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there. For
And
like
those are
specialty
for
beers.
more specialty brews, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I have a pH meter. I use it just about every time to check mash pH to see if the calculator is correct. So, I mean,
Yeah, you need distilled water, right?
yeah, you have to calibrate it with distilled, and then there's like whatever. It tells you how to do it. But Richie, that's what you could do is like see if your calculator is telling you the right thing by testing the pH on it mid mash.
Right.
And also anyone who has Charleston water or RO can be definite about their starting pH profile as well. And then they know exactly what to put into the calculator.
Will you repeat that? My internet was kind of sucking there for a second. Repeat that, Chris.
That'd be mine.
About the Charleston water.
Yeah, if you buy a pH meter, you could test the water every time you go to brew and see what your pH is. That way you're not guessing on what your projected mash pH would be. Just simply change that number into your calculator every time. Same for distilled or RO, because it might not always be the same.
Yeah, with like Beckley, they have 2 different distributors for their water. And so, I mean, there's no way to tell where your water's coming from. So, unless you have a kit, you can't know specifically every week. But I think you can get close with their websites calculations, but it depends on how accurate you want to be.
Yeah, I think on a homebrew level, I mean, approximation is what we do with a lot of stuff, but Richie, on like kind of a bigger level, I mean, approximation is better than nothing, right? I mean, I think approximation and trying to get there.
Yeah.
But this is exactly why, Richie, most breweries have RO systems. You know, like most breweries opening now are doing RO systems, or they're doing something to have a consistent water profile. Because if your water is not consistently the same, your beers are not going to be consistently the same.
You can smell chlorine in your water. You can smell it.
And I think that's where you definitely have to do potassium metabisulfate or Camden. I mean, same thing. Camden is potassium metabisulfate. Like,
if you're
you've got to
heating
do
up your
that.
water and you smell chlorine, then make those adjustments.
At the same time, though, people are buying RO systems. I mean, they're buying them if they can afford them. But I've heard plenty of interviews with brewers that they love their local water source and they've got it so dialed in. They probably wouldn't go to RO just because they wouldn't spend the money. I mean, depending on how large scale you are, I mean, that's a massive financial obligation.
Yeah, it can get expensive to make adjustments. Exactly.
I mean, that's not just making adjustments. I mean, it's installing an RO system that could handle a 20-barrel brewery.
Yeah, it's getting less and less expensive. It's amazing how much cheaper an RO system is now than it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. But I mean, it's still a cost, and that's true. Like, if your tap water is consistent and you feel like you can trust your profile or whatever you have, then you're good to do that. I would say though, Richie, I actually think it's pretty inexpensive to actually adjust the chemistry of those, even on a large scale. It's not a huge cost to adjust. It might be a large cost to start with a blank slate or kind of know what you're at.
Right. Exactly.
Eric just shared the kit that he has. If anybody wants to borrow it.
I think it might be the same. If it's like the More Beer water chemistry starter kit, that's the one I bought. But
yeah, it'll tell you, like, you can do a test for it. It just gives you approximations. It doesn't give you an actual number.
Never mind. You did the test kit. Sorry. I bought like the brewing salts starter kit. Like, it's got, like, I don't even know, an ounce of everything or something like that. A little bit more of the more common stuff.
Now, this one you can just test your water. It'll tell you, like, for calcium, it'll tell you if you're in the 0 to 50 parts per million range, 50 to 100, 150 to 200. It just kind of gives you a general approximation of where your water's at. And I kind of got it because I signed up for a class a couple of years ago on water chemistry, and they sent it for free. And that, like, I mean, I've only used it like 3 times because every time the results are the same. So if anybody wants to borrow it, I'm totally willing to let you have it because there's a ton of reagents in there and I'm not going to use it all. So probably could have bought one for the club. I could probably donate it to the club. We can just share it. Everybody can test their water. It'd be a good experiment.
Yeah, that's good. It's a good idea. So figure out your starting. I mean, that's going to be a huge thing, or just start with RO. Adjust your mash pH. That can make a big difference. And then, so let's talk about target water profiles a little bit, because that can play a really big role depending on the style. So a lot of your German beers, a lot of the beers that Eric's brewing, you're talking like pretty soft water. Am I right, Eric? You want pretty low mineral content for those.
Yeah.
And then But like a stout, you're going to want like a pretty high mineral content to kind of help hold all the flavors, and it kind of helps kind of bond everything together. So that can make a big difference. That's really one of the big advantages to using something like Beersmith's Water app or Brewer's Friend. You can kind of really easily load target water profiles in. But just to say, you can use a balanced profile, but those things can make a big difference in how your beer comes out. Sulfates tend to accentuate like bitterness and dryness of a beer. So if you're wanting something more bitter or dry, maybe you want more sulfates. Chlorides can accentuate maltiness and sweetness, or they can add to the body of your beer. So if that's something you're looking for, you might want to up your chlorides. All of that is, by the way, written in that handout that Chris made. That's pretty basic. And maybe it's just worth experimenting some, right? So if you want to make a sweet stout, to say, okay, I'm going to go for a higher mineral content. I'm going to do some of the higher chlorides, and let's see what happens. Those can all still staying in your kind of target profiles. Those can be helpful things to do. Anybody paying much attention to profiles on styles of beer?
Yeah, but that's one of my goals.
Were you unmuted? I think no. Yeah, I use is it Brewfather? Yeah, I use Brewfather, and it makes it super simple to choose. My default source water profile is RO water, and you choose the style that you're shooting for. I think it might actually be based on the style, the recipe you chose for the total recipe, and it just kind of figures all this stuff out for you, which is super nice. It's a nice way to get into it. When I looked at the brewing water spreadsheet, I was like, oh man,
yeah, it's overwhelming.
But the app, I'm sure it does the same sort of thing behind the scenes. It just makes it, it just kind of gives you the amounts of different chemicals to put in your water, and your sparge water, which a lot of people don't think about that up front. Like, depending on how you're brewing, you're going to have your normal mash tun water, and then you're going to have your sparge water, and you have to adjust both in order to end up with the right profile at the end of the day. So Brewfather does both of those for you.
That was the first thing I got into when I looked at anything involving water chemistry, was chloride sulfate. And I've got a best bitter that I brew, and it's a bitter beer, so you'd think, sulfates. If I do higher sulfates in that, my wife won't drink it. But if I do higher chloride in it, it's like her favorite beer that I make. It is amazing the difference that it makes.
Have you noticed big fluctuations with Brewfather or not?
You mean fluctuations between beer to beer, or
double IPA to double IPA? I mean, seems like it's kind of wild.
I don't know. I've not really looked. I think probably the first time you could choose a style, I was kind of curious and chose between all the styles to see what it would do to the outcome. But it definitely changes the outcome. I don't know why it's doing what it's doing. I just kind of
I try not to question, but I'm just
whatever. That's good to me.
I mean, sometimes it's like, whoa, what the hell?
Yeah, I have no idea. I'm trusting it. It might be colluding with the people that sell calcium chloride. I have no idea.
Somebody that sells Epsom salt.
Yeah.
Cool. All right. Well, what other things do you guys want to talk about with water chemistry? That's all I had, and I don't want to do it all. So.
I thought Aaron made a good point. You want to make sure you treat both your mash water and your sparge water Go ahead and if you're going to use 10 gallons in the brew day, go ahead and treat all 10 gallons and go from that. And then if your pH of your water is really high, it wouldn't hurt to add acid to your sparge water. So I thought that was a good point you made.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Good thing. If you have 10 gallon container that you can treat it all in, you could do that. I usually treat it separately. I usually do my mash water and then do all of that. And then while it's mashing, I usually go ahead and do my sparge water separately, partly because I just do it in usually a 5 gallon container. So, but that does matter because all of that's going into your beer.
Yeah. I think like the key takeaway is, at a minimum, filter or cammed in. And then the second thing, is your pH, because a lot of times homebrew pH ends up being too high. You usually have to lower it somehow. I think those are probably the two biggest things. But I think we'd all agree that, like, as far as the whole beer making process, water is usually the last thing people worry about, probably in good reason, because as long as your water tastes good, it probably will make good beer. So.
I would say the other thing I would add is it's not just about taste; it's also about efficiency. When I started to address water chemistry, my efficiency for efficiency is like how much sugar you get out of the grain that you use. It went way up, like 15 to 20% higher than it had been before. Consistently, I'm like 5 brews in now from when I started to adjust the pH of my water before mash, and it's made a big difference. So I'd also consider something like that. If you have consistently low efficiency, it might be due to water chemistry.
Yeah.
I've been having trouble with final gravity here lately.
Yeah.
Maybe Kenny could comment on this, but I mean, I've started out at like 181 and ended up at 120. I don't know.
What are you using to measure your gravity?
Just a, regular drop.
Using a hydrometer or a refractometer?
Hydrometer. Right. I don't know. I've tried adding yeast nutrient after the first 5 days, so I'm hoping that'll resolve some of that. But the last batch was kind of sweet. I mean,
do you oxygenate your wort when you pitch your yeast? If you it might help if you add some oxygen to your wort right when you pitch your yeast. That'll help build them strong yeast cells and maybe help finish out your beer more.
Yeah.
Or you can add olive oil like Matt did that one time.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what about the fermentation temps? I already know.
Yeah, Kenny knows about the fermentation temps.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been, it's warm now, so I mean, the last batch I made, it should have been at like 67.
You're just doing ambient, right? Ambient
we don't
temps.
have any controls, so.
I mean, 1081 is a pretty high starting point. I mean, you got to have a nice, good, healthy batch of yeast.
Yeah, you got to have some super yeast.
We start off about 90 degrees and it drops down to about 65 or 67.
You want to do it the other way around if possible. You want to go from cold to warm rather than warm to cold.
Yeah.
90 degrees is is too high to pitch pretty much any yeast at. I would not pitch yeast that high, and because that could be hurting your yeast from the front. But especially on a big system, it needs the oxygen, because it's not going to have the oxygen after going through that boil. It's not going to have the oxygen to keep yeast healthy.
But I pitch it high, so I mean it bubbles up. So I mean, I don't know.
What do you mean you pitch it high?
I put the tube in the top of the fermenter, and it drops to the bottom like 4 feet. So I mean, it bubbles up. I mean, when I pitch to the yeast, it's full of foam and you know. So I don't know.
That yeast nutrient that I have, it says to add it like the last 10 minutes of the boil. So I always add my yeast nutrient right before the end of the boil.
Yeah, see, I've tried both. I've added at the end of the boil and at the end of the fermentation. So like 6 days in, pitch it.
Well,
I've tried both.
if you got a 1081 starter gravity, you probably need to pitch a lot of yeast and oxygenate it, make sure that temp's right. Otherwise, it'll probably crap out. That's probably why it's crapping out.
Right.
At really high gravity and maybe not enough yeast cells in there.
This beer's good. It's like 8.5, and it's a little sweet. I mean, it's good though, I think.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, I mean, anything that high, it's going to be hard to get it down below 1020. Really,
Yeah.
I mean, you're gonna have a hard time getting it below, 1016, 1015 max, depending on how you mashed it. I mean, that's just big old beer.
yeah. It was 181 starting. So. Kenny needs a haircut.
I'll say if you don't have any temperature control, that Kvike yeast is a wild thing, man. It'll take off.
I learned it.
You can pitch it at 90, 95 degrees and it'll just take off going like crazy.
Yeah.
I use Lallemand New England IPA yeast. That's good. That's a sweet yeast. I love that yeast.
Yeah,
I've used Hornindal in a saison at a pretty warm temperature, and it did really well. It gave me like all the characters I wanted in a saison. But recently I used it in a Goza at 66 degrees, and it was still finished in like 2 days.
Yeah.
And it still gave me like the fruity flavors that it's supposed to give you. So
You're using a whole packet or what?
yeah, I used whole packet. Yeah, just dry yeast, right? Is that what it was? Yeah,
Yeah.
I believe so. Yeah, just
Yeah.
put it on and it was good to go. It took it all the way down to 1010. So
Nice.
well.
Yeah, I want to try that Omega strain that they have that's supposed to make lager-like beers.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I've heard about that.
At high ale temps.
Yeah.
That one before the end of the summer's out.
Should know. I think
Cool. What else we got?
I think that's it. Feels like we, got where we needed to go. I think water chemistry can be another one of those things that can feel intimidating. So you can tell who on this call is paying attention to it. So reach out to somebody if you're not doing it and you want to. I know I'm still learning a lot about doing water chemistry and those things, but hey, water is the main ingredient in our beer, so it can make a huge difference making those adjustments. So I think that's all we had for tonight. Yeah. Anybody want to add anything?
We also have a club website coming on the way, so that'll be fun.
Awesome.
Live stream the development of that site, nights and weekends sort of thing for me. So you can watch Facebook for that.
I'm just wondering. I'm wondering how many beers is too many to bring to the club event thing.
There's never too
I have to
many.
ask. I'm coming back hardcore.
Whatever, man. Bring your beer. I think as far as, I guess we didn't talk about the fruit beer competition. I think maybe enter your best fruit beer for that. Does that sound right to everybody? One beer per person, and we'll do like a brewer's choice. It'll be pretty simple. Everybody will vote, and kind of whoever gets the most votes will win, type of deal. But as far as bringing beer just to share, I mean, hey, you know, bring beer.
Sounds good.
And bring the legal limit for transport.
Yeah.
Yeah, how much is that? I don't even know how much.
It's probably like 2 barrels or something.
Yeah.
We need a restriction on Kenny's beer link or his beard link.
I haven't tasted a beer from Kenny in over a year, I don't think.
Oh, they're
Yeah.
coming.
It's been a while.
It's true.
It'll be good to be back in person and to get to try each other's beers again. So
Yeah, it's
pretty
exciting.
excited. Cool. All right, well, let's go ahead and wrap this meeting up. Thank you guys for hopping on tonight. It was good to have a discussion about water chemistry. Chris, thanks for making that handout. That's super helpful. And feel free to hit anybody up who is doing water chemistry to learn what they're doing or get a feel for it.
Yeah. You guys can hit me up if you have questions, but also I'll put something on about grain, about picking that up too. So come get your grain, guys.
All right.
Pick up your grain. RSVP for the picnic. RSVP anybody you want to bring. Would love to have them. Let us know how many people will be there so we can plan well. We look forward to that time together.
Yep.
All right. Thank you, Jed.
All right. See y'all
Thanks.
later.
Later, dudes.
All
Happy
right, we're
beer
heading out
weekend.
over here. Yeah.